Hello and welcome to FACT's webinar called Introduction to Farm Animal Welfare Certification. Our guest presenter today is Kara Shannon with the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or ASPCA. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I'll be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive in, let me just take a minute or two for a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT. We are a national nonprofit organization headquartered in Illinois. We work to ensure that all food producing animals are raised in a healthy and humane manner. And we accomplish this by supporting humane farmers such as yourselves, promoting policies that make food from animals safe and healthy to eat, and by helping consumers make informed food choices. My colleague Samantha and I run FACT's Humane Farming Program, which works with livestock and poultry farmers from across the country. We are so lucky to be able to work with you all. We offer grants, scholarships, training courses, mentorship, and of course, webinars on a variety of fascinating topics. We are currently accepting applications for our Fund a Farmer grants through January 10th, so please keep an eye out for that. I will direct you to our website, foodanimalconcerns.org, to learn more about all of our farmer services. At this time, I'm just delighted to introduce our friend and guest presenter, Kara Shannon. Kara is the Director of Farm Animal Welfare Policy at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or ASPCA, where she leads the organization's state and federal policy work to fight factory farming, reduce farm animal suffering, and support higher welfare farmers and food systems. She holds a JD and certificate in food and agriculture law from the Vermont Law School, and she lives in Waterbury, Vermont. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Kara, so you may begin your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you everyone for the time this evening. I so appreciate it. I love how many people are here with us tonight and that there's so much interest in welfare certification. So I'm excited to talk about it all. I don't know if the slides are showing up here. But I'll start off by saying first that a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today and a lot of the charts that you'll see and graphics with a lot of great information all exist in a fantastic resource that the ASPCA published called our Farm Animal Welfare Certification Guide. It's available for free online. It's just aspca.org/farm certification. And we created it for exactly this purpose for folks who are interested in certification, but maybe are a little overwhelmed by the amount of information that's out there and trying to figure out which certification is for you, where you should start. So that's kind of meant to be a one-stop shop. It's got information on all the different certification programs, or 3 specific certification programs, and their standards, what their audit looks like. It's got great case studies from farmers who are already certified and what that process looked like for them and the benefits that they found, as well as some resources on how to find funding. So if it comes out of my mouth tonight, it's probably also in that guide. So I really recommend that you just download it and keep it as a reference as just to go back and look at. And again, it's particularly helpful because of the way that the charts are set up there. You can look and compare right there on paper, which is a lot easier than finding standard page 100 of one program and standard page 87 of the other and looking at those two. So today, I'm going to walk through a couple of different things. First, generally, the certifications that the ASPCA recommends that folks look for, so the Animal Welfare Approved, Certified Humane, and the GAP program. Talk about some of the benefits of getting certified, what that process looks like once you decide to do it, and again, what some of those funding opportunities for. And I hope that we're going to have lots of time for question and answer because that's where the good stuff happens, I think. So diving right in. The certification guide covers 3 different certification programs.
Let me just ask, Kara, I'm not sharing your slides right now. Do you want me to, I don't know if you want me to share them. Okay.
I was like, oh, they haven't shown up. All right.
But I can do it for you if you'd like, otherwise.
Yeah, nope, I can do it. Let me put them in slideshow mode. All right. Y'all let me know once those show up.
Yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. We've already talked about that.
Kara, somebody would like you to go from the first slide.
To go from the first slide instead of where
the
it started from.
Yeah.
Sure. Let me back it up. This would have been the original first slide.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And again, this is just the overview of what we'll be talking through. Again, this is what's in the certification guide, and turning to the 3 certifications. So the ASPCA does a lot of work to help educate consumers who want to find higher welfare food and are often and understandably very confused about how to do that. And so as part of that work, we looked into, the existing marketplace of welfare certifications, and determined 3 to be, the most meaningful for farm animal welfare. Those 3 are animal welfare approved, certified humane, and the GAP program. And there's a couple of kind of key reasons that those receive that designation. The first is that they all have totally public and transparent standards from the consumer side of things. We think that's really important. People should be able to understand exactly what they're getting when they buy a certain product. And it's fantastic that if the very motivated consumer wants to go in and, for example, read AWA's full laying hen standard, they can. We think that's really important, and not the case for all the certifications out there. So that's kind of the first key tenet. The second is just the rigor of the standards. These 3 programs, as I'm sure many of you have probably figured out by now if you've looked into them, do represent a spectrum of different welfare systems, from systems that are still entirely indoor based, but where animals do have enough room and environmental enrichments to carry out their natural behaviors, to the fully pasture based, animal welfare approved system. But at a baseline, they're all ensuring that those worst practices that we see on industrial farms, like extreme confinement, aren't happening. So they are providing animals with meaningfully better lives than they would have on an industrial farm, which is important. And the other piece is their auditing structure. So all 3 of these programs do have an on-farm audit, which is again not the case for every program. Some just require a desk audit. Some have audits that happen every 3 years, every 5 years. So we feel that regular audit to ensure compliance is important, and to ensure compliance with the program's entire 100% of their standards. Again, there are other programs that exist that allow farms to become certified if they meet, say, 85% of standards. Again, when it comes to transparency and having consumers understand what they're getting, that full compliance feels really important, because if you don't know which 15% they didn't meet, then you can't really be sure what you're getting. And then finally, all 3 of these are available nationally, so we can feel good recommending these to consumers, knowing that they can actually go out and find them somewhere, whether that's the farmer's market, the co-op, or even in a larger retail store. So that's really important, and why we ultimately recommend these 3. As we've seen in the poll, AWA is the standout for this group, which is what I imagined, again, as the fully pasture-based program. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more in depth in that. I won't leave out the other 2 because I know we had interest in those as well. So the business benefit of certification, I think obviously the fact that there's just many people interested in it kind of illustrates that in itself, but really there's a couple of key things that has made certification something that really is beneficial. And the first is just the overwhelming demand that we're seeing for higher welfare food. I think as the general public better understands what's really happening on the vast majority of industrial farms, and wants to buy outside of that, and is really looking for products that they feel like they can trust, are treating animals better. We're seeing the demand for verifiably better, as in someone else has come on and ensured that they're following these higher standards. And we're seeing that demand not just from individual consumers that might be at a farmer's market or shopping for their own families, but also from larger buyers like major corporations who are committing to higher welfare standards. Public institutions is a space where we're seeing this demand grow really quickly. There's a lot of both schools, universities who have committed to some kind of broader food procurement scheme that includes different value categories, and animal welfare is one of those. And generally those programs really lean on these certification programs for those producers to kind of meet those value categories. And obviously that's a huge demand. Major institutions are feeding millions of meals. I think in California alone, the food spend of institutions that are committed to some kind of good food purchasing program is almost $150 million. So that's enormous. And at the moment, there's nowhere near the demand or the supply to meet that. So there's a huge gap in the market, and it makes a lot of sense to try and fill that. Another place where we're seeing this, and then what I'm sure a lot of people have heard of recently, is California's Proposition 12, which bans the use of certain extreme confinement and cages and crates, and then products coming into the state from those. But it also goes a step further to require certification of that. So if you want to sell into California in the coming years, you'll have to be certified by a third party saying that you're meeting the welfare standards under Proposition 12. So again, talk about an enormous market. There's other states who have passed similar regulation. Arizona, again, is facing in a requirement that eggs sold in the state will have to be certified as cage-free. So hopefully we'll see that trend continue. So getting this certification certainly has a benefit to that market access. And then of course, there's the value add and hope that you're getting a premium for that product. Willingness, consumer, I know that we got a question ahead of time about consumer willingness to pay. And I think that, I mean, I'm not an economist, but from what I've heard, there might not be a more difficult thing to pin down than that stat. So I can't tell you an exact number of what folks are willing to pay. ASPCA has done surveys where the majority of folks answered that they would be willing to pay, more for something that they felt they could trust was from a higher welfare farm. We obviously see premiums coming to farmers who have these certifications. In our welfare certification guide, you'll see there's a case study from a GAP farmer who says, all his farm and the other certified farms that he works with are seeing double-digit premiums for their product. That said, obviously the price that you can get for your product, certified or not, is dependent on a lot of different things. It's dependent on the market you're selling into. It's dependent on where you're already priced at. You might already kind of be at the ceiling, and the certification itself won't necessarily allow you to raise the price. It might help you better justify the price. So there's a lot that goes into it, of course, but I do think that generally it's fair to say that getting one of these certifications at the very least justifies the premium price that you may already be charging and could allow you to charge more. So a certification process, it's not so bad. And everyone who's in this webinar is kind of, I feel like, over the first hurdle, which can sometimes be the hardest, which is that beginning, figuring it all out, doing the research piece, realizing like how many certifications are out there, which one's right for you. And once you get through that, it's pretty simple. It's an application, you'll schedule an audit, just hopefully become certified, and then it's just maintaining that certification, which is, we'll get more into that in a little bit, because I think that's the one other barrier we often hear from farmers, is that record keeping barrier. So again, the first step is just looking into the different programs. There's a lot of things that may very easily make it clear that one won't work for you. For instance, just the question of, is the species that you're raising covered? That's helpful. Like, for example, dairy goats, if that's what you're raising, GAP doesn't have standards for dairy goats. So already you've narrowed it down to 2. Apologies for the barking dog. There's a major cost differential between the programs. Sorry. Give me 1 second. This is what happens when someone from the ASPCA is giving a webinar. It's just bound to happen. Apologies, and she may keep barking, so I'm going to just keep going. So AWA is by far the most inexpensive program. I'd say annually, it generally is going to come out to somewhere around $200. Whereas in contrast, GAP and Certified Humane are much more expensive. And that really comes down to the fact that AWA really highly subsidizes the cost of the audits for their producers. Whereas both Certified Humane and GAP, you're paying that full audit costs, which can be easily over $1,000 a year for the audit. So that explains why most folks are probably more interested in AWA here. If you can meet their standards and you're fully pasture-based, it really often does make the most sense because it's going to be so much less expensive, and really is considered kind of a gold standard because the standards are so rigorous. So if you can meet the standards, it's pretty attractive for the lower price. And yeah, I'm seeing, feel free as questions come to you. I'm trying to monitor the chat so I can answer them as they come in, and if I miss them, we'll try and get to it at the end. So once you've done that research, maybe looked again, use the guide as a resource, seen how you match up to standards, then it's just as simple, applying. All of the programs have online applications, which are, I think most folks generally find to be the easiest, but if you like the snail mail, they also allow that as well. Depending on the program, there may be an application fee, and worth noting that fee, they keep that fee whether or not you ultimately get certified. And just also worth noting, because I think some folks worry about this, but everything that goes on an application is totally confidential. But you'll see they ask all kinds of questions about what you're raising and the location, and regardless of whether or not you get certified with a particular program, all of that information stays with them confidentially. So once you apply, it's really just a matter, the program itself will review your application. They might reach out if they have any clarifying questions that they want to ask. But then the next step is scheduling that on-farm audit. There can be a good amount of time between the application and getting the audit. It might just be a busy season and the auditors they're already running all over the place. Sometimes programs try to wait until they kind of have a good number of folks in one region and send an auditor out to do them all at the same time. So I would say that if you're in a rush, to start quicker, because that wait for an audit could take a bit. And the audit is going to involve, again, on farm. So someone's coming out to the farm, they're going to inspect all the places the animals are housed, and they're going to inspect your procedures and any records that you've been keeping about the farm. Again, we'll get to the record keeping piece in a second. And then depending on the certification program that you choose, there may also be an audit required of your slaughterhouse. So for example, AWA does require an audit, and they do certify your slaughterhouse as well. So if that's a program that you're interested in, I recommend that you focus on that slaughterhouse piece before you even start your own application, because the worst thing is to get all the way through, apply to AWA, get audited, get certified, and then realize that you either don't have a slaughterhouse near you that's certified and doesn't have an interest in getting certified. For example, the plant you're currently using might decide for whatever reason that they're just not interested, and then you can't have the certification, right? So definitely something that you want to check in on first. And AWA is very helpful with that. They can tell you if there's any plants near you that are already certified, and if you want to keep using the plant that you are using, but they're not certified, they can help you have that conversation with them to figure that out. But again, definitely do that first, because there's nothing worse than getting through all of this and then having that be the one thing that throws it all off. So finally, assuming that the audit goes well, you can get your certified. So the next step is just to get the label on your products and anywhere else you might want it. For basically the second you're certified, you can put it up on websites and social media. That's pretty easy. But to use on a product, you'll have to submit that good old FSIS form and get approved. And then of course, build in the time to get it out on products. Let's see, I see a question here. What if I process my own meat? AG will tell you that plants are local to you. Exactly, yes. So AGW will not tell you what plants are local to you that are certified. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. It depends on the stage in the process. Processing your own meat on farm, that should be fine. Again, they'll inspect that and they'll make sure that you're following their standards, but you're not required to use a plant with AWA. A lot of folks do on-farm processing, especially of poultry. And then finally, maintenance. So this is where we'll get to the record keeping piece, because I think this is what we hear from a lot of people is kind of scary and is certainly the most time consuming piece of certification for most people. And that's the record keeping requirements. So most of these certifications require a number of different plans around how you'll meet the program standards, plans around disasters, and then a lot of record keeping, records of what you're feeding, records of mortality, records of, treatment for disease, a lot of record keeping. But they're all very flexible in how those records can be kept. So if you love an Excel and you're great in an Excel, cool, put them in that. If you are a pen on paper type of person and you want to keep a piece of paper in the barn and just make a note every day, that's fine too. So they're very flexible, so you don't have to necessarily fit into a box. And I found that most of the farmers that we talk to, even though they admit that it's a bit of it takes some time, that at the end of the day, they feel that they're better off for having done it, especially for the planning. It's just nice to realize, when an extreme weather event is coming, when there's a flood, when something happens and you're about to go into panic mode, then you realize, all right, I planned for this, and then you can just follow it. So I definitely, again, I hear that the record keeping is a bit of a pain, but I think most people agree that at the end, it ends up being worth it. So in addition to staying on top of those record keeping requirements, you've got to comply with the annual audit. Certified Humane is every 12 months. GAP and AWA both do a 15-month audit so that they're able to see your farm in different seasons. And I'll say that one thing that's really worth doing in maintaining your certification is to really take advantage of both the marketing and the technical assistance that these programs offer. All of them have lots of great resources that you can tap into, from things as simple as signage and to put up at farmers markets around your barn, but also help facilitating connections with buyers and other types of networking, and great resources similar to some of the great ones that FACT puts out about social media and just great ways to market your farm. So really recommend taking advantage of those. And finally is the funding opportunities. So again, our guide has a whole section on this where we've tried to identify nonprofit, federal, and state funding opportunities for farmers that are looking to get certified, that need to make some on-farm improvements to get certified. Obviously, the main one that we recommend is FACT's own Fund a Farmer grants, which are open now for applications. Those are $2,500 or up to $5,000 for capacity building grants for farms that are already certified and looking to expand in some way. So that's a nice thing to know, that if you do get certified and then business goes crazy, FACT can help you out to expand to meet that demand. FACT is truly these grants, the animal welfare certification grants, are the only grants that are specifically for this type of transition to achieve an animal welfare certification. I'm sure folks are familiar. There's a number of financial assistance for organic transitions, but this is the only one, unfortunately, the only one dedicated to welfare certifications. But there are a number of both state and federal programs that are within a realm that a lot of the on-farm projects that you might have to do in order to meet some certification standards could still qualify. So for example, a lot of states have kind of value-added or diversity grants. Oftentimes we find that these types of projects can qualify in there. There's a lot of environmental and conservation types of grants, both federal and state, any type of pasture access, pasture improvement. Those types of projects can sometimes fit in there. So I highly recommend, in addition to taking advantage of FACT's grants and applying to those, taking a look at the guides, seeing what's available in your state, seeing what's available federally, because again, free money is great. And I know that the application process can be a little much, especially for federal programs, but there's also a lot of great resources to help you work through that. Oh, there goes the barking again. Sorry. And that's the last for me. So we have lots of time for questions, which is good because that is what I wanted.
Kara, this is awesome. A couple things I just want to mention before we get going into the questions is our grants, the Fund to Farmer grants structure did change a little bit in that the grants are now up to $3,000. So just so folks know, and the categories are pretty similar to what Kara mentioned. I know the guide was from a couple of years ago and we kind of updated it and for cost of project expenses. But folks can, and we can talk, if you have specific questions about the grants, definitely get in touch with me. But if you're looking to be certified and also is kind of a pasture-based project, they can be, there's several pots of funding that you might be eligible for. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we will be doing, Samantha's going to be hosting a webinar in January about federal funding opportunities. So it should be a good one with Margaret Crome from the Michael Fields Ag Institute. So for additional information on that end of things. But we do have some really great questions that have come in on the chat, and I should say in the Q&A. So if folks do have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A bubbles, the two bubbles, and we will try to get to them. We do have a good amount of time. Do you want to kick it off, Sam?
Sure. So Sandra asks, what would be a good starter certification for small farms? And she has layers, meat birds, and pigs.
Again, I think I'm going to be another shameless AWA plug. I think it's just, especially if you're pasture raising, I just think they're a fantastic way to start. Again, it's so much more inexpensive. And I find that they have a lot of great technical resources. So as you're kind of learning as you go, they'll be there. And their standards are really robust. And it's just even if whether or not you decide to get the certification, I feel like it's a good place just to look to see if you're doing things that make sense and that are following best practices.
And the other thing they offer is, this is actually why we originally got certified with AWA, was because they have the egg cartons and they were so much cheaper than everywhere else. So it was a great place to be able to get egg cartons. And they're cute.
There is a question, and you kind of addressed it briefly, Kara, about the difference in cost when it comes to auditing. If you can speak a little bit more to that, might be helpful to folks.
Yeah, I mean, the direct answer, again, why the difference in cost is mostly that AWA just highly subsidized the costs of the audits. Audits, when you think about it, someone has to travel from wherever they're located to come out to the farm to spend upwards. I think often the first audit is the longest and could take potentially an entire day, but at least half a day. So that's someone hourly rate for that long. So it's expensive to have someone come out to audit the farm. So that's the major difference in cost between GAP certified humane and AWA. But I'll say also that, some programs are just more catered to the larger businesses, like GAP and Certified Humane have more businesses that are larger, that are selling nationally, that are in, for example, the GAP program was started in Whole Foods. You still need that certification to sell there. So obviously we're talking about profit margins. If you're in Whole Foods across the country, that audit's not so bad. So AWA is the one that's very much, again, more catered. You can be a larger farm and get AWA certified, but they started out catering much more to the smaller folks, and the price falls.
So Sandra had another question. Thank you, Sandra. What if you have one species that's not covered, but the other two species are?
Good question. Technically, she's really going for it. It's like she knew. Some of the programs do allow for like a split operation certification, and particularly if the animals are in separate locations, so you can get one certified and not the other. So if you find that for example, some of the programs have deals with each other, so if you get an AWA audit, that can also get you a certified humane if they work together. So if one of the species is covered by humane, the other, but that's not the case. Imagine we're talking fancy poultry.
We used to be, we're not AWA anymore, but when we were AWA, they certify specific species. So you can have, like our turkeys, we never bothered to get them certified, laziness, but we never did. And it doesn't make any difference. We just couldn't advertise that we couldn't advertise that the whole farm just was AWA, if that makes sense. So we had to be specific about the animals that were, so I could advertise that my pigs were and that my layers were and my sheep were, but I couldn't ever say that the turkeys were. But it really wasn't that big of a deal.
Awesome. Okay, so a question about, is there one of these certifications, of the 3 humane certifications we're talking about, that is more recognized by the public than the others, if you had to pick?
Hard to answer, because again, I think obviously a whole food shopper is likely to recognize GAP because it's in the store. And similarly, certified humane has more larger, you can find it in, you know, whatever, a Kroger, Shaw's, they're in larger retailers. So people have seen it more. But I think that folks who have taken the time to do the research, and I've already looked into which certification is best. I mean, whether, you know, Consumer Reports, AWA is on all of those. There's not a lot of polling around exact recognizability. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a great answer. I think it depends on your audience. Again, I think if you're selling direct to consumers, I think AWA is pretty well recognized. And the ASPCA does a lot of education on these programs. We've got our whole Shop with Your Heart site, and we list certified farms right on our site, aspca.org/farms. So that adds to that recognition if you get certified.
I will say that you keep it very well up to date. I go there to check it out.
All right, so Carrie asks, is this a peer audited situation where we have to find our own auditor, or does AWA or CH and GAP have auditors that they send to us for an audit?
They send them to you. You don't have to do anything other than be there for the audit. They'll handle the rest.
It's probably in contrast to like the natural certified naturally grown, which I think is
right.
Yeah.
Right.
A question about if there are overlaps with the USDA certified organic certification when it comes to record keeping, and how that might you might be able to play off one or the other.
That's a good question. I imagine there's quite a, especially in the terms of tracking the day-to-day on the farm, I imagine there's a lot of overlap because they're generally looking for the same things with feed and mortality and particularly antibiotic use and things like that. So I'm sure there's overlap there. I don't have a strong enough knowledge of exactly what the organic record keeping requirements are to say for sure, but there has to be at least, I'd say 50% overlap at least, because again, they're all looking for the same types of things with their record keeping.
All right, so Tess asks, unlikely that there is a certified slaughterhouse for sheep near here. I do my own on farm. Would a grant be possible for improvements to my kill shed? You mean like a fund a farmer grant? Is that what you're asking, Tess? I guess if you could type that in the chat, that would be good. I have found with slaughterhouses that there's more than you think. It's pretty surprising how many there are. Like most of them in our area are in North Carolina are certified with AWA.
And there are grants, and more. We're actually seeing the federal grants are probably more than you're hoping for your on farm. But again, some states, especially if your state's got any kind of diversification or value add grant program, that's the type of project that might be eligible for that. So again, worth looking.
So kind of a related question is, someone's asking for more information about the requirements for butchers. And if you can speak to some of the certification related things that come up with processing and slaughter.
So they're quite different depending on which certification you're going for. So for example, both Certified Humane and GAP do technically have slaughter requirements, but they're much more, they lean much more on kind of general best practices, AVMA slaughter guidelines, and other general, I'm blanking on the name now, but kind of general, more industry humane slaughter audits can qualify. If a plant already has that audit, they don't need to get another one from those programs. But AWAs are they've got a whole set of standards, including, for example, like poultry, there's certain line speeds that you can't go past. So it's much further than any of the other requirements. And again, it varies very much depending on what species we're talking about, but generally that one is going to be something that someone who's owning a plant would have to, there may be things they'd have to check. There's some requirements around, types of flooring to prevent flipping and things like that. There's much more detailed standards in there. And again, those are spelled out in more detail in the certification guides. You can look, and of course in AWA's own standards.
All right, from Patty, if you aren't concentrating, on marketing, I should put my glasses on, but the best for your animals and property and to grow, are these certifications still worth working towards?
I think yes. I mean, again, I think even if at the end of the day you determine, even if you have a certification for a number of years and you build up the market, and then decided, it doesn't serve you to keep forward, I think that these are such a helpful tool in getting started and creating a market, creating an audience. And especially if I think in direct sales, some folks, they're very helpful there too. But again, I think once you get those loyal customers and especially if they've been to your farm and they know you, AWA or another certification can help get them in the door. And then perhaps you can keep them there, but especially if you're trying to sell in retail, hoping again for institutions, this makes you, especially in the institutional space, again, we work closely with a lot of institutions trying to find higher welfare food, and they're having a rough time of it. So if that's the space that you're interested in getting into, a certification would make you much more competitive in that space. So I think depends on how you want to grow and where you want to grow. But I think it's still definitely worth working towards, and as best as you can align with the standards, even if you're not currently certified at that time, is going to benefit you.
Awesome. Question.
Wait, can I say something?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I have to. So I think it's really, I think it's nice to go through the certification process just if you're unsure as to whether or not you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, because they will come and audit you and say, okay, yes, you're doing, this is great, this is not great, and this is what you need to do to improve it. And I think that's very helpful when you're first starting out. But yeah, so I mean, but if you don't need it for direct sales, then it's $100 a year. So you have to think that through. But that's why I think, and I know you said this, Kara, why it's really good when you're first starting out to just make sure you're doing the right thing, because it is important that you do the right thing.
And this is actually the next question from, are there any certifications for a farm that is just starting out? And we did talk about how, AWA thinking that this might be a smaller size farm is probably, more tailored to that. And I also have, and I'll pass this over to you, Kara, for any further thoughts. I've also heard that sometimes it's like Sam was talking about, it's people are building their farms from these standards and starting out the right way instead of going back and retrofitting and kind of figuring it out from there. So there is some benefit even if you are just starting out to kind of undertaking the process from the beginning. But if you have any other thoughts about that, when would be a good time to, implement some of those, feel free to share.
No, yeah, I think that's right. I think so much easier to know things ahead of time and build and retrofit and put animals in specific places because of that, instead of having to go back. We work with a lot of companies who are working to get their producers, their suppliers up to date, and it seems like little things can be very large projects that if you just seen ahead of time, that the stocking density is just barely off, and that is therefore a huge, you're going to span your whole barn or do something else. Simple things like out in pasture, having clearing. I feel like one of the biggest issues was a large hole that needed to be filled, which is just to ensure the safety of the cattle, like just things like that. But if you know ahead of time that those could come up, I feel like just save headaches and time and money and so much.
Sam, before we move on to the next question, I was going to cue you to run that other poll just to have it up while folks we still have a bunch of questions and a bunch of time, but I do have an end-ish webinar poll if you want to give us your feedback about, and this is always really helpful for us as we plan for other webinars. I'm going to question the folk, or just a comment that we will be sending out the recording and links to the slides after this webinar. Thank you, Sam. Okay, and I think you're next up on the question.
I am. So from Carrie, does the fee cover multiple species, or is it applicable to each species being certified? It's probably different for each certification, isn't it?
Yeah, and it depends because each have kind of a different set of fees necessarily. So they all are going to have that audit fee. Again, some have a general application fee. And then others have a fee that can be based on the number of animals that you have that you're processing at the end, or for like dairy amount of liquid milk or whatever. So like Certified Humane has a per head fee that you'll pay on top of that. So it's not necessarily different for this. It's going to be a similar fee with a different structure, but the general auditing and application fees are just one fee. It's not at all by animal type or anything.
All right, we have a question about the grants. So Cheryl says, I have a starter herd of Angus and want to expand the pasture land and add to the herd. I assume the Fund to Farmer grant's appropriate. Any advice on grant writing? So I will say that most likely there's a project in there, assuming that you're eligible for when you meet some of the other criteria. Fencing is always a very popular project. Lots of other kind of projects for water systems, not so much for beef, but mobile housing also come into play. Those are just some examples. We do have we have example applications and example tips on the grants page that I'll be sending out. Samantha has also put together a really great course on funding your farm that walks you through some of the thought process to go through writing your application. So that is on our website as well. That would be really probably what will take half an hour to an hour to go through. Samantha, if that's something that you kind of want to beef up your grant writing abilities. So yes, we do have some of those materials available, and I will be sure to share them with folks.
Right. Dante asks, does certification apply only to slaughtered animals, or can a certified animal be sold live for a consumer to slaughter? So for ethnic markets.
I mean, the way you get the certification would still be the same. I'm going to double check and get back to you on this, but I think that should be fine because there's also a whole market of folks who sell certified animals to other farms to start their herds, especially for AWA. They have requirements.
I wouldn't tell them that you're going to sell when you get your audit. Don't tell them that's what you're doing. I seriously don't. They won't like it. So you can sell live animals, no problem, but don't say specifically what you're doing with them. I probably shouldn't have shared that.
Words of advice from Samantha.
Yeah. I neither endorse or don't endorse.
Or didn't hear that. Let me take a question that came in on the chat, just so I don't lose it. Katie, sorry, this is the problem with the chat. Everything is scrolling down. Katie's wondering, interested in the role of veterinarians and the veterinary client-patient relationship and vets as certifiers. How does that all work? I'm trying to see if there's any other background on that. How do vets fit into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, these certifications all generally require that you have a relationship with the vet. Most of them require a health plan that's been written in consultation with a vet. So if you're going to get certified, you generally need a good vet that's a call away, which I imagine most farmers hope to have anyways. All the certification programs all have standards boards, which generally include vets on them. So vets are involved in that way. And the certifiers themselves often come from a variety of different backgrounds, some of which are vets, large animal vets. So they're all over. There's no like formal inclusion of vets necessarily, again, other than on the standards board, and that they're generally required to run a farm. But they're throughout the process. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but
All right, it's my turn, right, Larissa? So Sharon says you need a USDA certified to sell the meat, correct? It depends what meat. Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Kara, you can answer that.
I assume that they mean a USDA certified facility, a slaughterhouse, as in federally inspected.
I would assume so.
Which
That's what I would.
depends just how far you're planning to sell. You could go to a state certified plant if you were just staying inside your own state's borders, but if you're trying to cross state lines, then yeah, the plant would have to be federally inspected.
Or you can do on-farm processing under the poultry exemption for poultry, but not for red meat. But you do have to have some sort of, that you can't just sell meats that you, without going through some sort of certification, whatever it happens to be. And it's different from state to state.
All right, so more questions about processing and so this one involving mobile butcher. What if you plan to use one of those? How does that work into the certification plans?
Yeah, I mean, generally, again, allowed as long as it's a properly certified and it's following the slaughter standards. AWA has whole provisions for that in their standards specifically around that. And some actually sort of technically require that. The highest level of GAP 5+, step 5+, you're not allowed to transport the animals for slaughter. So they have to be slaughtered on farm. So most folks, unless you have your whole own facility, are probably using mobile for that anyways. So very much fits into the equation if that's what you're already using or what you're hoping to use.
Very cool. Tess asks, since I do my own custom harvesting and I mentor my sheep homesteading customers on the humane process, is it possible that my farm audit will include the auditing of my process?
Yes. Yeah, again, especially if it's, I assume that's probably going to be a type of AWA type of farm, they would come out and check that out for one of your harvests for sure.
Okay, we might have to go over to the chat at some point, Sam, but there's some good stuff that's coming in. But from Colleen, do you have any examples of how much value this adds to your operation? How much profit is seen as average? And I know that's something that you said is really hard to pin down, but yeah, anything that you can share would be most helpful.
Yeah, again, it's so dependent on your current pricing, what market you're in, whether you made significant changes to get certified or if it was really certifying what you were already doing. I think all of those come into play. I think generally a 5 to 10% premium would be a basic expectation, something you should easily get. I mean, so much of, again, pricing is your market, what they're able to spend, who you're selling to. Obviously, like institutional sales, even though there's a scale there, the schools won't be buying, from you at the same maybe price point that a high-end restaurant would. So it's just all going to depend. But I think that, generally there is certainly a value to these certifications. And again, at the very least, it's helpful if you've already found the price point that works for you, to help back that up, to help tell the story of like why this price differential is there, why your products cost X amount more than what they're seeing in the grocery store. I think that's a big value of the certifications. Again, there's certainly a premium. It's almost impossible to tell you exactly what that is because it's so many variables. But I think they're such a helpful tool in telling the story and what sets your product apart.
So Dante, we've actually got some really cool comments and in the chat, and I was called out for suggesting somebody not focus as the certification. So sorry, Nick, it's a good point. You don't want to water down the certification. Still, I wouldn't say a word. So Dante says, what if the breed I want certified cannot be found from another farm? So a starter herd. And then with AWA, I know it's okay. You don't have to buy your breeding stock from an AWA farm, but you do, because it's a birth to slaughter, you do have to buy any like feeders. So like if you're getting feeder pigs, they have to be from a AWA farm. But if you're buying some sows that you're going to breed, then they do not, because it's the animal that's being harvested, right, Kara?
Yeah, you got it, nailed it. I've got nothing more.
Oh man. Okay. Well, let me just take Dante's question, and then I'm gonna probably wrap it up because I want to share some stuff too. But he says, for some ethnic consumers, stunning before slaughter is not preferred. Does certification allow an exemption for these circumstances if the slaughter is done on farm? That's a tough one. And
generally, no. Generally, all of these require stunning before slaughter, regardless of if they're on farm. Like, AWA requires allows on farm slaughter of poultry, but they require stunning, which is it's a space there's a lot of conversation going on, but at the moment, no.
So I think for like I know with kosher, that it's so long as the stunning doesn't kill the bird, then it's acceptable under kosher. But I don't know about like halal. I don't know enough about halal.
And I think depending on, there are certain like certifications of halal and kosher, and some allow and some don't. So it just depends on the interpretation.
Yeah. So did you want to take some of the questions in the chat, Larissa? Because some of them are good.
If you want to read one or two out, we probably have time for one or two more before. I just wanted to show this picture because this is a certified farm.
It's a
that
good
we
picture.
Funded, yes.
So Tess says, I sell many live animals for breeding stock and starter herds for new farmers, homesteaders. How can I become certified if it depends on a slaughterhouse qualifying?
That is only if you're selling products. Do you need your slaughterhouse? So if you're not, there are plenty of farms, especially in the cattle space, that just sell stock. They're not certifying and then
if you're not selling, if you're not slaughtering, then you don't have to use a slaughterhouse. Sort of, yeah. All right, Larissa, did you want to?
Sorry, since I'm just screen sharing, it's all over the place now. Do you see another good one, or otherwise I will wrap it up.
Sales.
I think we.
Okay.
There's a few comments from people that say they have to go tuck their animals in, so I appreciate that. Taking it off early.
Somebody actually shared something in which is not going to help with people in the recording, but he did not give it to, just put it with the hosts and panelists, but I'm going to copy it and send it to everybody so you can see that information. Are there a lot of nonprofits that have received any of the certifications?
As in nonprofit farms that have received the certification? There are a handful of farms that are technically organized as or within nonprofits that are certified. The first one that comes to mind is Shelburne Farms, which is a certified humane dairy in Vermont, which hence I think there's at least another in New York. Most of those are teamed up with some kind of educational component. So Shelburne Farms is a teaching farm. The other one in New York that I'm thinking of as well. Yeah. So you certainly can be incorporated in other ways and still get certified.
I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think so too. I highly recommend folks check out ASPCA's website on this. It's really wonderful between the guide and the list of farms that you can kind of scroll through and see what products they're raising and where they're located. It's very, very helpful, especially if you're just trying to get a sense of who's doing it, and maybe you reach out to some of them and talk to them, or go through ASPCA or FACT to make some connections. But let me just do a couple of housekeeping items. I know it's top of the hour. We're just about time to sign off. A reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available, as well as the slides. I'm going to be sending out an email to everyone that registered and that was on this webinar, as well as archiving them on our website, on our FACTS YouTube channel. And I will also send some links to some of the things that Kara mentioned. We do have some other good webinars coming up later in the fall and winter. I'll send out links to those registration, as well as our application for our Fund a Farmer grants that you might consider for pasture projects or certification projects, or maybe a combination of both. I just want to give a sincere thank you to you, Kara. It's really wonderful. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us today. It was really fun. I hope that we are able to continue our collaboration. And of course, Samantha, thank you for all that you're always doing to help during these webinars. Couldn't do it without you. Makes it so much fun. Yes.
Just before we say goodbye, there's just a couple of questions about how to get a hold of Kara, and some questions that are specific to something to do with your website and everything. So Larissa will send out Kara's information so that you can talk to her. You can contact her and ask her those questions.
I will CC Kara on my follow-up email, if that's okay with you, Kara.
And she just put it in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so it's there as well.
Email. Yeah, and I'll give a final plug. Just again, feel free to reach out. We truly love talking to farmers and again telling your stories. But we particularly love having you tell your stories to lawmakers. So if you're interested in policy, especially policy that helps create more public funding for higher welfare farmers like yourself, feel free to come into my inbox for that, because we truly love to show you off to your lawmakers. So keep that in mind too.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kara.
Yeah, and there's going to be tons of opportunity for that. I mean, there already is, but going
big
forward.
year.
Yeah, Farm Bill. So we want to tell those stories. So I think, again, I just want to also acknowledge everyone that's out in the audience. We still have a great group of folks that stuck around till the very end, and we really appreciate your interest in this, your work for your animals, everything you're doing for your land, your communities, your families. So thank you. We are here to help and help you thrive. So I hope that you have a great rest of your day, that we connect again soon, and that everyone stays warm. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye. All right, Sam, you get to close it down.
I get to click the end. So much power.